The night buzzed with the chatter of affluent guests, their laughter and clinking glasses resonating against the polished marble floors of the Grand Lumiere. Beneath the towering crystal chandeliers, a scene was unfolding that none present would forget. One waiter, one arrogant chef, and a grand piano at the heart of the room. What started as a cruel attempt to humiliate him turned into a moment that silenced the room and shattered egos. His hands trembled as he approached the piano, every step accompanied by the sneers and whispers of the wealthy elite. "Let's see if he's worth anything," the chef had scoffed moments earlier, his words slicing through him like shards of glass. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with expectation and doubt. The room leaned in, waiting to witness either triumph or disaster. He took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keys. What they didn't know was that this wasn't just a performance. It was his life's unspoken story. The Grand Lumiere was the epitome of opulence. Every corner of the ballroom glimmered with wealth and excess. Polished marble floors that mirrored the dazzling crystal chandeliers above, gold-trimmed columns that seemed to stretch endlessly, and walls adorned with works of art worth more than most would earn in a lifetime. The aroma of truffle oil and aged wines wove through the air, mingling with the chatter of high society. Waitstaff, dressed in crisp black and white uniforms, moved seamlessly through the crowd, their trays laden with glasses of vintage champagne. Among them was Marcus, a 28-year-old waiter whose quiet grace often made him invisible to the room's patrons. But tonight, invisibility was a luxury he couldn't afford. His name was on everyone's lips, whispered in mocking tones as the evening's entertainment took a sharp, unkind turn. Marcus had been working at the Grand Lumiere for 2 years, blending into the background of galas and charity events hosted by the city's elite. Few noticed him beyond his role as a server, but beneath his reserved demeanor lay a reservoir of talent and dreams long buried under the weight of survival. His mother's old piano, scratched and weathered, had been his sanctuary growing up, the one place where the chaos of the world melted away. But life had a way of clipping wings. The piano lessons stopped when the bills piled up. Dreams of performing on grand stages faded as reality demanded he focus on putting food on the table. Marcus shelved his passion, trading melodies for minimum wage, and tried not to let bitterness take root. Until tonight. At the center of the room stood André Delacroix, the famed and notoriously arrogant chef whose culinary empire stretched across continents. Known as much for his sharp tongue as for his culinary genius, André was holding court among the guests, regaling them with tales of his success. His booming laughter carried over the room, but his attention soon fell on Marcus after overhearing a passing remark about the young waiter's piano skills. "Piano skills?" André had drawled, his lips curling into a sneer. "A waiter with delusions of grandeur? Now that's rich." The guests laughed obligingly, their collective mirth echoing through the room. But André wasn't done. "Tell me, garçon," he said, addressing Marcus in a tone that dripped with condescension. "Can you play? Or are you just another dreamer?" Marcus's throat tightened as every pair of eyes turned to him. He wanted to disappear, to shrink into the shadows and escape the humiliation. But André pressed on, gesturing toward the grand piano that sat in the corner of the room like a forgotten relic. "Let's see if he's worth anything," André announced, his words slicing through Marcus like shards of glass. "Go on. Show us what you've got." The tension in the air was palpable, thick with expectation and doubt. Guests exchanged amused glances, some leaning in to witness the unfolding drama. Marcus hesitated, his feet feeling like lead. Every instinct told him to refuse, to walk away and spare himself the embarrassment. But then he remembered his mother's words from years ago. "Don't let anyone steal your light, Marcus. Even if it's just for a moment, let them see what you're made of." Taking a deep breath, Marcus straightened his spine and moved toward the piano. The room quieted, the hum of conversation replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against his chest. His hands trembled as he sat down on the sleek leather bench, his fingers hovering over the polished keys. The memory of his mother's encouragement steadied him, pushing back the tide of fear. This wasn't just about music. It was about reclaiming a part of himself he had long buried. The first note rang out, clear and resonant, cutting through the room like a beacon. As Marcus played, the world around him began to fade, replaced by the familiar comfort of the piano. The weight of the room's stairs melted away, leaving only the melody and the memories it carried. But the tension hadn't dissipated entirely. The guests leaned in closer, their anticipation thick in the air. Would he rise to the challenge or falter under the weight of the moment? The doors to the Grand Lumiere's ballroom swung open with a flourish, and a hush rippled through the crowd. In strode André Delacroix, a man whose mere presence seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Known for his sharp-tongued wit and an ego to rival the Eiffel Tower, André carried himself with an air of invincibility. Dressed in a tailored midnight blue suit, every step he took was deliberate, every glance a calculated move to remind others of his dominance. His piercing eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on Marcus, it was like a hawk spotting prey. "Ah, the hard-working garçon," André said, his voice dripping with condescension as he approached Marcus. The murmurs in the room quieted. The guests, sensing a show, began to circle. "Tell me, what is it that you do besides scurrying around with trays? Perhaps you dabble in art." The words struck like barbs, but Marcus kept his head bowed, focusing on the tray of empty glasses in his hands. He didn't trust himself to speak, not with the growing knot of anger and humiliation tightening in his chest. But André wasn't looking for silence. He thrived on spectacle. "Come now," André pressed, turning to address the room with a theatrical wave of his hand. "I hear whispers that this garçon fancies himself a pianist. Imagine that, a waiter with the hands of an artist. Shall we put it to the test?" The laughter that followed was sharp, cutting through the air like shards of broken glass. Marcus's grip tightened on the tray, his knuckles turning white. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he felt rooted to the spot, unable to move or respond. One of the guests, emboldened by André's confidence, chimed in. "What's the harm, eh? Let's see if he's got talent or if he's just full of fantasies." André's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Exactly. Come, garçon, the stage is yours." He gestured grandly toward the piano, its sleek black surface gleaming under the chandelier light. The room buzzed with a mix of anticipation and cruelty, the air thick with unspoken questions. Would Marcus rise to the occasion, or would he crumble under the weight of André's taunts? Marcus hesitated, his feet feeling like lead. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to walk away and spare himself the humiliation. But then, as André's grin widened, Marcus felt a flicker of something else: defiance. Why should he let this man strip him of his dignity? Why should he hide a part of himself just to appease a bully in a suit? "I don't think he's going to do it," André said, his voice loud enough to draw another round of laughter from the crowd. "Perhaps he's not as talented as the rumors suggest." The laughter stung, but it also ignited a spark within Marcus. He straightened his shoulders and met André's gaze for the first time. "If I play," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "will it be enough to satisfy you?" The room fell silent, the weight of Marcus's words cutting through the noise. André's smile faltered for the briefest moment before returning, wider and sharper than before. "Enough? Oh, garçon, we'll see about that. But do us all a favor, don't bore us." As Marcus walked toward the piano, the room seemed to shrink around him. The polished keys gleamed under the chandelier's light, a challenge waiting to be met. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, the eyes of the crowd burning into his back like hot coals. He reached the piano and paused, his fingers hovering over the keys. 1,000 doubts swirled in his mind. What if he faltered? What if the years away from music had dulled his abilities? He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of André's challenge pressing down on him. But then he remembered his mother's words. "Don't let anyone steal your light, Marcus." "Any day now," André said, his voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "We don't have all night." Marcus took a deep breath, letting the tension roll off his shoulders. His fingers found the keys, and with a quiet resolve, he began to play. The first notes rang out, soft and hesitant, but as the melody unfolded, Marcus lost himself in the music. His fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even him, weaving a tapestry of sound that filled the room. The guests, who had been whispering and sneering moments earlier, now stood in stunned silence. André's smug expression faltered. He crossed his arms, his brow furrowing as the music swelled, each note a defiant rebuttal to his earlier mockery. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a mixture of pain and triumph that seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone in the room. But Marcus wasn't playing for them. He wasn't even playing for André. He was playing for himself, for the boy who used to dream of grand stages, for the mother who had believed in him, and for the part of him that refused to be silenced. As the final notes faded into the air, a heavy silence hung over the room. The guests stared at Marcus, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. André, for the first time that evening, was at a loss for words. But before Marcus could bask in the moment, André clapped slowly, the sound breaking the silence like a gunshot. "Well," he said, his voice laced with forced politeness, "that was unexpected." The tension in the room shifted. Some of the guests looked at Andre, waiting to see how he would reclaim control of the evening. Others glanced at Marcus, their faces softening with newfound respect. "Tell me," Andre said, his smile returning, though it no longer reached his eyes. "Did you rehearse that? Or was it pure luck?" Marcus met Andre's gaze, his own expression calm but unyielding. "Does it matter?" he asked. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as they rested on his lap. He had proven himself, but he knew the night wasn't over. Andre wasn't the type to back down so easily, and he was right. Marcus sat motionless at the piano, the weight of Andre's sneer pressing on him like a challenge he couldn't refuse. The memory of his mother's voice echoed in his mind, gentle yet firm, full of unwavering belief. "Don't let anyone steal your light, Marcus. Let them see what you're made of." He inhaled deeply, his fingers hovering over the keys. The room had grown unnervingly quiet, the whispers and laughter silenced by the tension hanging in the air. All eyes were on him, but the faces blurred together, fading into the background. It was just him and the piano now. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the memory of those long-forgotten lessons guide him. The calluses on his fingertips might have faded, but the muscle memory remained, buried beneath years of hardship. He exhaled slowly and pressed the first key. The initial notes were soft, tentative, like the first steps of a dancer unsure of the stage. A gentle melody floated into the room, delicate as the brush of a feather. Marcus's fingers began to move with more certainty, each note unfurling like petals in bloom. The piano responded to his touch, its polished surface resonating with a warmth and richness that enveloped the crowd. The melody swelled, rising and falling like waves crashing against a shore. Marcus's hands glided across the keys, coaxing out notes that spoke of pain, longing, and defiance. His foot worked the pedals instinctively, weaving layers of sound that filled every corner of the room. The music told a story of struggle and perseverance, of dreams deferred but never forgotten. Each chord was a declaration, each trill a defiance of the doubt and mockery he had endured. As the tempo quickened, the room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the raw emotion pouring from Marcus's fingertips. Andre's smug expression slowly began to fade. His arms, once crossed in confident dismissal, now hung loosely at his sides. The corners of his mouth twitched as if he were searching for something to say but couldn't find the words. The other guests, too, seemed transfixed, their earlier amusement replaced by awe. Some exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of guilt and wonder. The music shifted again, softening into a delicate refrain that spoke of hope. Marcus leaned into the keys, his movements fluid and graceful, as if he were having a conversation with the piano. The chandelier lights caught the sheen of sweat on his brow, but he didn't notice. The room, the audience, even Andre, all of it had disappeared. It was just him and the music, the one constant in a life full of uncertainties. As the final note rang out, resonating like the last word in an argument, the room was utterly still. Marcus's hands hovered over the keys for a moment longer before he let them fall into his lap. His chest rose and fell with the effort of the performance, his heart pounding in his ears. Then came the first sound, a single clap, tentative and unsure. It came from the back of the room, and like a spark catching fire, it spread. More applause followed, hesitant at first, then growing into a roar. The guests rose to their feet, their cheers and whistles echoing against the ballroom's high ceilings. Marcus looked up, his eyes meeting theirs. He saw something he hadn't expected: admiration, respect, even a hint of apology in the faces that had mocked him only moments ago. The knot in his chest began to loosen, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. But his gaze drifted to Andre, who stood apart from the crowd, his face unreadable. The chef's lips were pressed into a thin line, his jaw tight. For a moment, Marcus thought he might say something cutting, a desperate attempt to regain control of the room. But Andre remained silent, his eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that suggested something had shifted within him too. The applause swelled again, drawing Marcus out of his thoughts. He stood from the bench, offering a small, grateful bow. The room erupted into another round of cheers, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt seen. Not as a waiter or a servant, but as an artist, a person with something to offer. As the guests began to gather around him, showering him with praise and questions, Marcus caught a glimpse of Andre retreating toward the back of the room. There was no malice in his departure, only a quiet acknowledgement of defeat. Marcus turned his attention back to the crowd, their smiles and words of encouragement washing over him. This moment wasn't just a victory over Andre's arrogance. It was a reclamation of his identity, a reminder of the light he carried within him. and for the first time in a long time he allowed himself to dream again. The echoes of applause still lingered in the air as Marcus stepped away from the piano, his chest swelling with a pride he hadn't felt in years. He scanned the room, now filled with smiles and nods of approval, so different from the sneers and laughter that had greeted him earlier. For the first time he felt seen, not as a faceless server, but as someone who had something unique to offer. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders for so long began to lift. One of the guests, a sharply dressed older man with salt and pepper hair, stepped forward, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "Young man, that was extraordinary," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Charles Whitaker, a patron of the arts. We must talk. I'd love to hear more about your music and see how I can help." Marcus hesitated, the surreal moment almost too much to process. But the sincerity in Charles's voice was undeniable, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt the faint stirrings of possibility. Nearby, a woman in an elegant gown added, "You've reminded us tonight of something we all need to remember. Talent and heart don't come with a title or a pedigree." Bravo. Even Andre, standing near the back of the room, offered a begrudging nod. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a quiet acknowledgement, though his pride kept him from saying anything more. It didn't matter. Marcus had nothing to prove to him anymore. As the guests began to disperse, Charles handed Marcus his business card. "Let's talk soon," he said with a smile. "There's a concert series coming up, and I know the perfect opening act." Marcus stared at the card, his heart racing. An opportunity like this felt almost too good to be true, yet the thrill of it grounded him in the present. This was what his younger self had dreamed of, what his mother had always believed he could achieve. But it wasn't just the promise of the future that buoyed him. It was the validation, the knowledge that his passion and hard work had not been in vain. For years, he'd silenced his own dreams, thinking them out of reach. Tonight, he'd prove to himself that they were not. Later, as Marcus stood alone in the quiet of the now empty ballroom, he let his fingers drift over the piano keys one last time. The notes were soft, reflective, carrying with them the lessons of the evening. He realized that resilience wasn't just about enduring hardships. It was about finding the courage to shine, even in the face of doubt and cruelty. He smiled to himself, his reflection in the piano's polished surface meeting his gaze. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he welcomed the unknown. He wasn't just a waiter. He was a pianist, an artist, and someone who could hold his head high. As he turned to leave, the faint hum of the piano lingered in the air, a quiet promise that his story was just beginning.